let me begin with John. How are you doing today, John?
I'm doing well. Very well, thank you.
Good. John, as the CEO of Earthling Interactive, you've worked with lots of different organizations, every scale from like small nonprofits to major global organizations, and helped them determine both budgets and the expenditures they're going to need to make around the projects that your team at Earthling our team at Earthling has done with them. So based on that experience, can you walk us through the key considerations that you see that organizations need to make when they're planning a budget for a digital project? What do they need to look for and look out for?
Sure, that's a great question, Erin, and an important one. Before I answer, I just want to thank you, Erin, for putting this together and moderating, and the folks that are joining us today and taking time out of their schedule. So thank you for that. Much appreciated. So the considerations that really the overarching element here is to understand the many parts and the complexities of a digital project. It's fun working with seeing the transformation of our customers as we've worked with them for a while, and they become to understand and understand those pieces. It's fun watching them appreciate the process, and now they're used to considering these things. But for many, if they haven't done a project or haven't done it in a while, or done it where it hasn't gone right in the past, some of those things that are important to consider are really the value of the digital project to the business. So maybe I'll list a few of them and then I'll go back and provide color, if that makes sense.
Perfect.
Okay. So really consider the value of that digital project to your business. Consider the cost of marketing or promotion to get users to the site or application, whatever the case may be. Recognize the importance and the cost of planning to properly define the business cases and the user use cases, and then the consideration of the ongoing costs. So those are the four. I mean, there's other smaller elements, but the very important ones to start out considering and make sure you're considering. So as far as the value, what do I mean by that, or understand through the value of the digital project? It's really, if the digital project is vital to your business, and if you're building it, it should have some function in your business. Well, then that budget should be allocated in a way to accomplish that ROI. So really, arguably a misguided approach is where a business comes in, they say they know generally what they want, and here's their budget. They've set aside a budget. Well, maybe it's lined up, but if it's not, now you've got a budget that's not meeting or not going to give you that ROI that you're looking for, in that site. So it's like a car analogy. If you go into a car, you're going to get $10,000, you're going to buy a new car, you're not going to get a Lexus or a BMW or whatever the fancy car is that you want to buy. So second one then that I mentioned is consider the marketing or promotion costs. Another misconception that we sometimes get is, well, the site application, it's a great idea, it's going to be great. Once it's built, the users and the revenue will just come. That's not the case, unfortunately. I wish it was that easy for our customers, but really that promoting and marketing that cost is something that site is really important to consider, and because that's going to be the basis of driving users and getting that site out there for revenue or whatever the source of that site is. And really, whether this is an internal site, so some of the applications are more of an internal employee-based site or application, or if it's external, it applies to both. If it's internal, you got to promote that to your employees, how they're going to use it, make sure they're using it. And if it's external, then you're going to have some direct costs of marketing, promoting, and this includes digital marketing, ongoing aspects there, search engine optimization, analytics, measuring that, ad campaigns. So those things are all things that are some of that needs to be done in the front end as you're building it, and then of course once it's done, to continue to keep eye on that and move that ball forward. And the nice thing about the marketing is you can measure the input of that of that investment? Is it successful? If it's not, then pivot, change, and do something that drives the users more so. The third thing I mentioned was recognizing or the importance of planning. So really defining the key business cases and use cases. And this is an important one, because if you're just gonna, customers that come in and they just want to jump in and start building, well, have you done an analysis of what's key to your business, what's key to your users? Because if you just start building something, you're gonna, there's gonna be a lot of money wasted on something that maybe it's not significant, maybe it doesn't matter to your users or your business. So kind of driving that forward all the time. And you don't want to overbuild right away. You kind of want to build as your revenue and as the success of the site warrants it. And then finally, those ongoing costs. So, that's technical debt, maintenance, security, web hosting, digital marketing. Yeah, I mentioned it earlier, but that's an ongoing piece as well. And, you've got an asset now. And so really maintaining that and investing in it as that site moves along and lives is an important thing to consider. So that's, with that, I'll turn it back to you, Erin.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
That's, you bring up the importance of marketing. We have many case studies basically that reflect a lot of what you're saying. And just this week, in fact, I was talking with a client who was beginning to feel frustrated because their e-commerce site was not generating revenue for them over and above what they were spending to maintain that site. We got a little further in the conversation. Turns out they have done exactly no marketing for that website, and acknowledged that, and we're a little chagrined, but it really illuminated how they had made the assumption going into that project that build it, they will come, sort of a thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, not just as a call to do marketing, but as a way to think about, like, we make assumptions about something existing in the digital universe that it is just going to be available, but that does not mean that people are going to find it. So that's a really good point. Now, John, when you were talking, you mentioned something that I've been interested, we've had good conversations about it, and that's this term technical debt. It can sound kind of jargony, but it's actually really important. Can you describe what that is a little bit for us?
Sure. It's basically just that putting off that cost of that technical debt, or sorry, cost of that technical work until a later date. So it's technical debt's sometimes a bad misconception or a bad annotation around a project, but it's a normal aspect of a digital project. So it's important to really embrace that with your technical team, manage it and plan for it, because ignoring that technical debt, it's not gonna go away by itself. And really, I say it's kind of a normal process of a project, and that's something that technical debt can be incurred every during high development cycles of a project or active cycles. You could be incurring that every day, or bits of it every day. Just think of it as the developer, let's say, is making a decision around how complex or how in depth do they build this functionality or this code around this piece, around this functionality. And that's kind of measured against the budget, how much time is left. And so maybe there's a decision that's saying, oh, let's build it not quite so grandiose right now. We'll do that, we'll do that later. It's like, use an analogy of, say your roof is 20 years old, and you say, well, you could fix it this summer, or maybe you can wait 1 to 5 years. That decision, several factors are gonna come into that decision, but really at the core is there a direct cost or an opportunity cost with waiting and doing that later. So I can cover some more kind of examples and when to do it and when not to do it if we want to dive into that. But that's the
actually, I would like a little bit of color around that, an example. And one thing I want to be sure to point out that I think is easy to overlook when you start a technical or a digital project is that technical debt is sort of, it sounds yucky, and it can be if it's not managed, but it's really just part and parcel of engaging with a digital project, partly because technology is always evolving, it's always changing. So debt is just part of the ecosystem of the digital experience. And so can you tell us a little bit about that, the management of technical debt and sort of the psychology behind keeping
Yeah.
technical debt under control?
Sure. I mean, maybe the best way to do that is just going to talk about examples of when, when it might make sense and when maybe it doesn't. And so, as you again as you go on the project, there's several reasons for it, but those cases where it might make sense is this, you're building infrastructure for a future scale. So, okay, if right now you're going to have 100 users, then you don't want to build infrastructure right now for 10,000. You can come to that later. So put that aside as technical debt, know that it's there and plan when you have to address it. So that's one. Building features for future user needs. So again, what are that goes back to that planning I referenced. Knowing the key features that users are going to use, that's what you want to focus on now. Those fringe cases, or you're going to get a new segment of users maybe someday. Don't build those now. Put those off as debt. And then it's the same kind of idea around functionality. You might have certain features that you need a basic functioning of that feature, but maybe not expansive. You can delay that. You can delay that till later. So those are cases where it's okay and it's part of the constant consideration. Some cases where you got technical debt where you shouldn't be incurring it, or you have incurred in the past and you need to deal with it. So that's around security. Security's at stake. Things have changed around that. It's an active ongoing thing. You don't really want to put that into debt or very long if you do. And infrastructure that is reaching end of life. You mentioned things change and digital aspects change, assets change. So making sure that whatever infrastructure is in place, if the entity supporting that is reaching end of life, you're going to have to restructure to deal with that. And then if you've got inefficiencies that you built in, for a developer administrator inefficiencies. So let's say something that you built in the system several years ago, and you acknowledged it then, but now it's creating too many inefficiencies with the developers or administrators. You might want to address that. And then finally, user needs. So, if users are demanding something and you're starting to lose users over something, well, it's time to deal with that debt or not incur it.
Those are great examples. And something else I'd put on top of that is the second set of examples that you shared, more urgent technical debt. That's a budget you're going to need to come up with quickly, and you need to kind of move that into current budget. Those others are things that need to be on the horizon when you're looking at your budgeting and your long-term budgeting and working with your team to plan for those longer-term expenses. And that's just a great time for us to move over to Bill, because this is your area of expertise, how you do that budgeting. So once again, thanks, Bill, for joining us. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about that budgeting side. So John's shared with us what you're going to need to budget for. Let's talk a little bit about how you're going to do that budgeting. So what would be some key recommendations you have for analyzing or determining digital expenditures, or I think those could also maybe fall under capital expenditures?
Yeah, they do fall under both of those arenas. From an accounting perspective, in general, it's fairly simple. The cost of maintaining a website or redesigning it, fixing bugs, those are all considered expenses that just would go into your operating budget. But the cost to develop or acquire a new site, the cost to develop or acquire a new feature, those are considered assets that go on the balance sheet. They're capital assets. And so planning for those should fall under the process of capital planning that a business hopefully does as part of their annual strategic planning process. And the capital planning involves basically looking at an inventory of all of your assets, making an assessment about their current state, the remaining life, future costs, when do they need to be replaced, and then also trying to identify some of the missing elements. You know, where are the gaps? What are the assets that we need that we don't have right now? And then making a plan and prioritizing those expenditures. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky. There's a lot of formulaic approaches to it. Internal rate of return, net present value, payback period. And some of them are more complicated than the others, and some of them are more precise than the others. But they all depend on judgment. They all depend on making some estimates about, you know, what the future is going to hold in terms of costs or benefits or savings. And that can be daunting to people. You know, it can feel like an exercise in imagination, where, you know, really I think businesses and business managers have to approach that and just say, we're going to make our best guesses right now. We're going to make our best judgments about the cost, the benefits, the life of these things, and just commit to revisiting that plan, those assumptions on a regular basis and adjusting them as you learn more or things develop. You know, things are constantly in flux. And sometimes that can seem like an obstacle to planning, because some people will want to just throw up their hands and go like, what's the point? But a plan is very much directional. It gives you a sense of priorities and so on. So, you know, hopefully what comes out of your capital planning process is you have a prioritized list of projects, and you can say, this is the most important thing for us to do right now, because it's going to give us the best return, or it's the most critical to our ongoing operations, or you know, whatever the case may be. And then, you know, you can kind of go from there. It provides that direction and structure. You know, I'm not going to get into the technicalities of net present value versus internal rate of return versus payback. Payback's nice, it's easy. You know, you're just simply saying, if it's going to save us this amount of money, we're going to get our investment back in this period of time.
Right.
It's a good way to rank things in terms of, you know, where do we get the most bang for our buck? But it doesn't look at relative size of the projects, relative risks of the projects, and that sort of thing. Those things all get factored into a net present value calculation, and that's why that's considered to be basically the state of the art. Most people consider it the best tool for evaluating projects. So does that answer your question, more or less?
Well, we could keep talking about this, and we will. I'm going to throw you a slight curveball, but
Sure.
I feel like it's a good idea because a question just came in through chat, which is very much related. So you, Bill, have experience with guiding your clients through thinking about capital expenditures that are digital expenditures. So let's just say you're an organization, I think we had talked about a hospitality organization, and everybody on your team is very well familiar about what your capital expenditures should or are likely to be, because this is the field they're familiar with. But then it comes to digital expenditures, and just the estimation is, and the experience to do that estimate is not there. How would you recommend that, you know, where can people go to get that information? Do they have to talk to you? Do they have to hire a CFO that has digital experience? Or where is a good resource for that guidance?
You're talking about what would be the benefits of an investment, a capital investment in digital?
Well, how to kind of plan out, as you mentioned, doing your planning. Do you need to have a digital expert with you when you're doing your planning? Should you consult with someone to do that planning, or is there kind of a rule of thumb? What? Yeah.
Yeah, you should certainly consult. How do you evaluate any of these potential investments? If you were needing to replace an air conditioning unit at your house, before you would establish a budget for that, you would talk to an air conditioning contractor. What's the cheapest? What's the best? What do you recommend? What's the pros and cons of each? And you'd be able to know that, well, if we spend this much, well, we'll save this over electricity, over what we've been paying on our old inefficient one that's not broken.
Right.
So I think it is important to turn to people with expertise. People with that's not your CPA or your CFO. That's the people at Earthling, for example, who could give you a good sense about what it will cost realistically, and what it will cost to maintain it over time realistically. John mentioned that trying to work to a budget by establishing a roadmap and allowing there to be some technical debt and planning in the future. So we're going to spend so much right now and make this piece happen. Next year, we're going to try to address this other piece of important technical debt and so on. That way you can have a well-informed game plan. But like I said, at the end, part of what comes into that equation is on the benefits side. You mentioned the client who said, well, I don't know, we're not really getting that much off of our e-commerce. Well, do they just look at their current experience, or do they make some judgments about what they're missing out on? Because maybe their e-commerce side is so clumsy and so user hostile that it doesn't encourage people to use it. I mean, I think we all have the experience today of doing some e-commerce with one company who's got a very easy, fill in, helps you along, makes it easy to place that order, the one-click purchase, versus somebody whose site, doesn't even function properly, and you just basically want to walk away.
Right.
So, digital presence it's critical infrastructure for most businesses now, not just simply retailers.
That's a really good point, and that's a transition I think that we're all making, and that's why I get to, if your team and your budget planning team isn't used to or familiar with the expenditures for digital projects, it can be really easy to misappropriate your budget to those things. And getting again to the question of how do you, for a new project, let's say, how do you even begin to do the estimates? And I think an important thing for everyone here to take away from this conversation is there are critical questions to ask. It's tempting to just ask, how much will it cost to build this thing? But if you really are discern the different parts of the project that you want to do and what it is you hope to accomplish, that will really accelerate your digital team's ability to answer those questions. So I think that those are both good points that you've made. And we just have 5 minutes left here. So as a way of wrapping up, I'd like to just ask, kind of a rapid fire question of each of you, sort of a bit of a prognosticating exercise real quick. I know I didn't plan this for you, but I think people could get a lot out of it. John, what would you say should be something that the folks here, and we have everyone from marketing to CEOs and tech people, what would be something that you think that the one thing that they might want to look at before they decide to, let's say, either make a new website or a new web application? Like, what would be one question you'd want to make sure that they could answer?
One question. That's tough. I think, I think it's really looking at what they want, what value they need that site to do for them, and answering that before. It's kind of a little bit of a chicken and egg, because we got to, how much money do you have? You're gonna have a general sense of, okay, we got 100,000 or we got 50,000, but really aligning that with what do we need this to do for our business, and what is going to be the return. Because your investment, you get a return on it, you're investing it over time. So that would probably be the most important.
I'd like to chime in on that same question.
Yeah, please.
Because I would say one of the most important questions might also be, as an alternative, is, what do your customers think? Jen mentioned earlier, what features are important to your customers? Do they think your site is flawed now? Do they think it's okay now? Is it something that's, you're just missing one piece? It would be great to focus group a little bit with some number of your customers and get some good feedback about, what their thoughts are about your digital presence to begin with.
I think those are both really good things to keep in mind. And it's funny how, you hear that and you're like, well, yeah, of course, I agree. And how frequently both of those things are overlooked. And partly because we, all of us as consumers, whether it's B2B or B2C, are having really flashy, exciting things thrown in our faces and stuff that we could spend money on. And it starts to feel like it's magic. But if you do ask those two questions, what do my users need and what do I really want to accomplish? This is the secret. It goes a long way towards protecting your budget because that's it's surprisingly easy to move away from those two things. So I really appreciate that observation. Well, thank you both, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I just got a nice job comment. So. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, and so please feel free to reach back out to me with follow-up questions. We will write you right back, and we'd be happy to answer questions that maybe you didn't get to, or after you've had some time to stew on what we've discussed today, you might have more questions, so please send them to me. And have a wonderful day, and we wish everyone the best as we go forward in this brave new world that we're in.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.